This episode of Global Talks is brought to you by FY International.
When you take into consideration the two countries and the way they're set up, there's a lot of similarities between the two economies.
We know that these partners are going to treat them with the same care and with same attention that we would do in our own jurisdictions.
The difference between being a sort of victim of circumstances versus seizing opportunities.
Both these countries, like I said, they're very open-minded type countries, the way they transact. There's also an element of multiculturalism within both of their socio-economic situations.
Our role as advisors is, first of all, to guide them to what are these differences in these two markets.
Well, hello and welcome to FY Global Talks, another podcast covering all things related to business and economics worldwide. On this episode, I'm very excited to bring two very, I want to say hip and happening, but also very knowledgeable professionals in their field. We are talking specifically about two particular countries in mind here. We're talking about Australia and Canada. So naturally, we wanted to pick the best of the best from these two particular jurisdictions so that we can cover the very exciting topic, which I'm about to share with you in just a bit. But first, let me introduce to you our co-presenters today on this particular podcast. My guests are Mr. Jim Fernandez from none other from our very own FY group. He happens to be the president of FY International and also the managing partner of Fernandez Young, a CPA firm based out of Vancouver, Canada. Jim, welcome to the podcast. You want to say a quick hello to our listeners?
Hello for everyone. I don't want to say good morning or afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're looking at this podcast. Thank you, Sia, for hosting this event, this conversation, and look forward to having a good chat with my friend Leo Delgado in Sydney, Australia.
Leo is representing Australia. He's also from CPA Partners, Accountants, and Business Advisors. But Leo, if you want to say a quick hello to our audience, I would much appreciate it.
Thank you, Sia, and thank you, Jim, for your kind words, and appreciate being invited onto this podcast. We're from down under, I should say, Australia. It's about 30-odd degrees here, so it's Celsius, that is, so it's nice and warm. I'm looking forward to having a good chat with Jim and yourself, Sia, over, I think, a very interesting topic that we're going to discuss today.
We're glad and excited to have you here, and thank you for giving us your time. It is, for those of you who are watching, as you can see, Leo is the only one who's not wearing a jacket, and that's because of the heat that he's getting. And we're going to put some extra heat on him in this conversation. But anyway, let's dive in to our topic of the day. If you are listening to this podcast and you happen to be in Canada and you've been contemplating doing business in Australia, or vice versa, you are in Australia and you're contemplating doing business in Canada, you must have a ton of questions about what is the best approach at this and what are the things that you should be looking out for. But if you are located in none of these two countries, I think you should be listening to this podcast anyway, because there is a much bigger impact in the global economy as it relates to these two particular countries. So I want to just open up our discussion here, folks. Why this particular topic? But as our first episode, why this particular topic? And I'm going to throw this at both of you. I'll let you guys decide who wants to jump in and answer this question. Why Canada and why Australia? Why this topic?
I was going to say, I think it was a very good mix. I mean, when you take into consideration the two countries and the way they're set up, there's a lot of similarities between the two economies. And I think it's coincidentally, I mean, it's a great way to start that you got Australia and Canada. You know, at the end of the day, two very similar economies, two very similar ways of doing things. I think from an economic point of view, the regulations in both countries are very similar. The tax systems, albeit there's a variance in in the actual rates is very, very similar. Given some of the current world situations that we're having at the moment, all these tariff wars that are occurring both on the northern side and even in the Indo-Pacific side with China, etc. I think it's become pretty prudent for countries like Australia and Canada to start searching and seeking, different trading partners and where they could place their goods. And, obviously Australia is an open window to the Indo-Pacific, and obviously Canada has got the entry into that North American market. So I think that they both very much complement one another. But both these countries, like I said, they're very open-minded type countries, the way they transact. There's also an element of multiculturalism within both of their socio-economic type situations. So I think it really lends really, really well. Again, they're also both part of the Commonwealth still. So I think that's another similarity in the two economies and the two societies, I suppose. So it sort of does lend a bit of a common ground with regards to these two countries, and we'll probably have a discussion about the free trade agreement that's in place as well between the two countries, which also allows a streamlining process for business to be conducted across those two different segments. But yeah, Jim, sorry, you want to add?
Yeah, Jim, from your perspective, what do you see?
Well, I think that today we are diving into the dynamic relationship between these two countries, Australia and Canada. We are two middle powers navigating the global change with resilience, innovation, and strategic foresight. So I believe that this podcast is going to respond a number of questions related to global trade shifts, to new agreements and partnerships, and in general to what are the opportunities that exist in these two countries for people that wants to cross the pond and start doing business on the other side.
Yeah, so can we start with sort of the bigger picture about how both of these countries are influencing the global economy? What is the big picture here, folks? And let me start with you, Jim.
Well, Canada has been a country that has maintained a very close relationship with the U.S. for many, many years. And the relationship has been strong in a variety of angles, being border neighbors, being joint partners in the armed forces, in the economy, being the first trading partner for each other. So there has been a variety of strengths that has been broken this year. And as a relationship of that, Canada has taken the initiative to start looking how to balance this situation globally. And I believe that Australia is in a similar position, trying to find alternative solutions so we don't fall behind. And I believe that this is part of why is going to be beneficial, this discussion today.
Well, let's ask Australia. What do you think?
Yeah, look, totally agree. I think Australia has always been blessed with some natural resources that obviously there's a big demand for its natural resources. And in particular, minerals and renewables, technology, some agribusiness, and now moving also towards property and infrastructure. So Australia has always had a very strong mineral deposits that, obviously lots of countries and other places on the planet require these resources. Problem Australia's always had is always been very regionally isolated. Obviously, we're down under, as they call it. We're very far away, and logistically, obviously, getting goods to and from the country has always been either long-winded or expensive. But in saying that, Australia's economy has, in most recent times, has been very dependent on the Indo-Pacific type region, and in particular its trading terms with China. And China, no different than perhaps what the USA has done most recently, has been a very strong player with regards to things like tariffs and other duty impositions that has actually caused, some stress in the normal economic ties between the two countries. And without getting too political on those issues, because that's definitely not my area of expertise, I do know that lots of Australian businesses are now looking at trying to place their products, outside of the Indo-Pacific, obviously to try and cater for some of these restrictions that have been imposed by, the big Chinese economy that's one of the big consumers of the minerals and other products that Australia has to offer. So I think from that perspective, there is a similarity between what Canada and what Jim has just mentioned is going through on that northern hemisphere type environment versus what Australia has been going through in the southern part.
Yeah. There's definitely some complementary things going on. And for the benefit of our listeners, this particular episode of FY Global Talks is been brought to you by FY International. And that is the reason why we're able to bring in the type of expertise that you are listening to. FY International is an association of accounting firms, CPA firms, consulting firms, law firms worldwide. And we put together the pearls of wisdom that we have in order to bring about strategies and look and review some opportunities. And this is what we're doing today, specifically with these two particular countries. Well, we hope that you get out of this particular podcast, this episode, is the ability to see not only what challenges you're facing, but how to overcome those challenges, and to go beyond that and look at some of the opportunities you have in order to seize some of these situations that have been brought up. You brought up one particular thing, Leo, which is, politics is not your area of expertise, and I don't know any CPAs that are also politicians per se. A lot of attorneys that are politicians, but not a lot of CPAs. But isn't it true, in fact, that it's sometimes hard to draw the line between politics and the economies of each country, because one drives the other quite a bit, right? And though we typically don't talk about politics, we do need to acknowledge that our political environment is really shifting and changing the dynamics of countries working together, resulting in, of course, challenges, but not only that, also opportunities. So we'll dive deeper into these areas as we go along. So when clients are considering exploring new markets, so let's just start there, right? Each of you have clients that are doing business in other countries. So when you have a business that's considering going into a new market, you have, for instance, Leo, you've got people from Australia that are considering, well, maybe I want to do business in Canada, right? Other than making an introduction to maybe Fernandez Young, your team basically on the ground in Canada, what sort of advice do you have for them before I hand it off to Jim for you to kind of describe what are some of the things that you talk about, Jim, with those business owners who are contemplating coming into a new market in Canada? But let's start with you, Leo, first. What sort of the first advice you have right out of the gate?
Well, it really depends on the nature of the business and what type of business they're trying to organise in particular. Obviously, there's a lot of variables there. Is the client looking at setting up, for example, a manufacturing plant over in Canada, or is it purely they're just opening up a distribution network? Do they just need a presence? I mean, depending on the type of objectives that the client would have, I mean, that's one of the first things that we would assess to see exactly what's required. But obviously anything that requires like an on-the-ground type applications, this is, I think, where the strength of the FY group comes into it, because, again, I'm not an expert in setting up businesses in Canada, but, Jim is. So obviously there would be a recommendation, a referral through to Jim for him to assist my client in setting them up, obviously, to trade in Canada. I would imagine that Jim would probably be doing the same thing in reverse, in retrospect, with regards to Australia. Look, the really good thing about both these economies we're dealing with the clients, and the message that I would be giving the Australian clients trying to set up business in Canada, is that both economies are very transparent. They're very stable and they're very investor friendly. And that's the similarities that they have outside of what we mentioned at the outset about being, a a common Commonwealth country with similar type socio-economic type environments and a multiculturalism aspect. And outside of that, I mean, the only major difference I could see between an Australian and a Canadian type operation is that Australia seems to be a little bit more centralised and regulatory with regards to its incorporation and tax systems, whilst Canada seems to also vary by its provinces. And there's a provincial element to the way they conduct business as compared to Australia, which is very much federally and centralised. But there is a very strong alignment, obviously that underpins, all the cross-border work. And I think the basis of that is having this similarity. So I would imagine that an Australian client who wants to set up in Canada, setting up business in Canada would not be a fearful event as compared to having to set up perhaps in some other part of the world.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you did bring up an interesting point in that. Look, when you're looking into a new market, you need a network, right? You need kind of a small village to make sure that everything is coordinating just fine. And even though there's some similarities between the two jurisdictions, there are some differences, right? And so let's go to you, Jim. So now you have a situation where Leo has made an introduction to you and has had some beginning talks with the business owner who's looking to do business in Canada. What some of the advice that you have for those of our listeners who are contemplating doing business in Canada? What are some of the things they should look out for?
Well, in my role as an international advisory partner for FY International, I get to talk to many clients that are considering going to a different market, and always there is hesitation dealing with the differences between what they are used to and what they are going to go. For example, Canadians going to Mexico are concerned about the risk level of the difference between the risk levels. And while a Canadian may be hesitant to go into Mexico, Mexicans are not concerned to come to Canada because of the risk, because they see zero risk compared with their own market. So we see differences of the legal system, the common law versus the regular Roman law that the civil code managed in most of the world. And that alone creates a variety of differences on how the system functions. For example, looking at trusts, we, as part of the whole organization, we tend to bring the concept of trust that in Latin America would be called a fideicomiso. That is a concept that has been inherited from the common law, but translated in very, very unrefined way. So these differences of labor forces, legal protections, that create a concern for the clients. And another thing that I have noticed is that there is less difficulty when they move within their own region than when they move from one region to another. For example, Europeans may feel comfortable in dealing in Europe, but crossing the pond, coming to North America or going to Australia, there is major concerns because they don't know how to assess that. They don't know what are the risks and consequences. So our role as advisors is, first of all, to guide them to what are these differences in these two markets. And second, to find a partner on the other side that can take them, receive them, and walk with them to complete their plan. And as FO International, as you mentioned, we have a great opportunity having partners everywhere. So partners that we know, that we trust, that we have worked with them, and we can comfortably mention and introduce them to our clients, because we know that these partners are going to treat them with the same care and with the same attention that we would do in our own jurisdictions. So if I am sending one of my clients from Canada that I take care of them, that I have known them for them. I want to make sure that whomever I refer, first of all, is going to work at the same professional level that I would work here in Canada. And knowing that Leo is going to be on the other side, it gives me great comfort because I know that he works like I do and my clients are going to be taken care of.
So, Jim, I am an Australian business owner, let's say, okay, and I've thought about coming to a new market like Canada, right? And what would be, first of all, what would be a sector, an industry that would be prone to that level of expansion from your perspective, Leo? Would that be in the products, services, or what type?
There are three elements that we are very common between the two countries. We are in natural resources, agriculture, and infrastructure. And mining is also very strong in the two countries.
So let's say for agricultural purposes, Jim, I want to come and do business. I'm thinking about doing business in Canada. What are the three things I should be thinking about, or three questions you have for me as a business owner thinking about that?
Well, Canada, as Australia, is a large country, and we produce more agricultural products that we can consume. And Australia is in the same shoes, so we have the capacity to feed the world, and many times these businesses are not necessary for bringing the products to the other country, but is to using them as a distribution post for the rest of the world. So even though we may produce similar elements, because Australia is in the southern hemisphere and Canada is in the northern hemisphere, there may be many products that are complementary to what we produce, and that would be a great benefit for both. If an Australian businessman is trying to do business of agriculture here, I think that would be something very different of what he would do in the country and bring products that we don't have here.
So it sounds like before we get into the numbers and the logistics of some of the things it should be doing, you look at it from the big picture perspective and kind of connect the dots about why strategy-wise, how this is going to work in the a big scheme of things based on the business owner's desires and needs and strategy, right? That's something that you look at. So let me flip that question to you, Leo. Let's say I'm a Canadian business owner. I'm thinking about coming to Australia, maybe for agriculture, maybe for other reasons, right? What are the three things that you have me think about, or what are the three questions you may have for me?
Yeah, okay. Just to add to that too, I think clean energy is a real big one between Canada and Australia at the moment. I think, especially in the current, global warming type environment, I think both countries are very socially accepting of global warming, and therefore what can be done with regards to, our blueprint that we're leaving behind. And obviously, clean energy is another big cross-border type service and/or industry that's very big in both countries. But going back to your question about the top three, without necessarily counting into threes, but obviously the Trans-Pacific Partnership that's in place between Australia and Canada, which is for all intensive purposes a form of free trade agreement between the two entities. And I had a look at that just prior to our podcast today. I made a few little notes here, but generally that allows companies that can trade more freely without paying fewer taxes on goods and services, cheaper products and better profits. So that's one thing that I'll be consider about depending on the industry. It's easier for businesses to operate across borders. There seems to be less red tape and fewer headaches for businesses trying to set up or expand their businesses in those two different countries. There's more access to service and professionals, which is what we're talking about today. It's not just accountants, but also engineers and educators, because, again, we speak a common language, which in the most part, and I understand that in Canada there's an element of spoken French, but for all intensive purposes, the English language is very, very similar. The other thing is, again, go back to the point I made earlier. I mean, the regulatory stance of both countries and how strong their legislative requirements are, and within this trade agreement that they have, it basically gives an Australian business owner a little bit of comfort that their money and their rights are protected in Canada as much as what they are in Australia. And I think that's a very important aspect for a business owner trying to put a business and or products into another market, is that they have a confidence in their own environment, because obviously they have a very good understanding of how they play ball in their market. But just to know that if you go to a country like Canada from an Australian perspective, that you're going to be playing in the same type of market, the same type of game plan, I think that gives you a little bit of an assurance of being able to conduct business across the borders. And then lastly, I suppose, looking at it from a tax perspective, which obviously as an accountant that's what we look at, is that in both these countries, we generally only pay tax once. You don't pay tax twice. There are some countries, around the world where obviously they're heavily taxed, and you're not just paying tax once, you're paying tax twice, whether directly or indirectly. And that's another good aspects about the two joints. So without necessarily giving you three facets, I've given you a couple of different facets of the discussion points that I would have with an Australian client that's looking at setting up business and or trying to establish a market presence in Canada. And it goes back to overall an element of confidence. I think the similarities between the two economies, a similarity between the two regulatory systems, a similarity between the two tax systems, and given that we have this this trade protection that we have, I suppose, from the the CPTPP, they call it, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement, Trans-Pacific between Canada and Australia, I think it gives the client a little bit of assurance with regards to being able to establish. So I'd have a lot of confidence in saying to our Australian client to speak to someone like Jim over in FY if they wanted to set up business, because of these similarities that we have between the two countries.
Okay, so guys, I want to talk about the T word. Tariffs, right? Tariffs. With the new tariffs coming from the United States being implemented across the globe, has that changed anything for each of your countries? And if so, what has changed? What do you guys think? What are some advice you're going to give our listeners based on that? Leo, let's start with you.
Yeah, I suppose, everything that's been happening with the tariffs, I mean, to a certain degree, Australia has been, because of the relationship, I suppose, it has with North America, and I would argue probably some of the dependencies that North America has on some of those very rare minerals that Australia seems to have. I think to a certain degree, Australia, although has been punished with the same type of tariffs that other world economies have, probably not to the extent that perhaps, say, Canada may have had. But I suppose at the end of the day, what these tariffs have done is created an element of instability, I suppose. So Australian exporters who were once upon a time exporting some form of product or service into the North American market, all of a sudden now has sweaty palms and sweaty parts in their bodies regarding what's going to happen with my product, what's the likely circumstances for these tariffs. So I suppose to a certain degree, without getting into the specific industries where it has affected, I mean, the tariffs in an overall economic perspective is not a positive thing. But if you are going to look at positive aspects on the tariff, and I'll use the example of Australia and Canada, like I read most recently, and there were some news stories here about how Australian wine producers were now finding that their wines are finding their way to the Canadian shelves in lieu of what used to be once upon a time USA wines. So obviously the reaction from the Canadian side on these tariffs was to, well, we're going to boycott some of the so-called USA wines. So now Australia has been able, the Australian wine producer has found a larger market, I suppose, which is like a substitute market. And you've got to remember too that these tariffs that we're talking about right now are the tariffs that perhaps the USA has imposed most recently on lots of different economies. But Australia has also been party to tariff restrictions and or tariffs with regards to its trade with China. So it has not been an uncommon strategy for China on that political dimension to be imposing tariffs on certain goods. And again, Australia's economy is driven by its two largest export markets are USA and China. So any tariffs on those grounds makes a very significant effect on the Australian producer. So I suppose from an EU perspective, that there are obviously industries that are now running very, let's call it fearful, or for the better word, creating some instability. They're now being forced to look at, okay, well, what's my alternative if the tariffs go up to this degree and it's going to affect my profit? Where can I place my product? And as a perfect example, there was a perfect example of the Australian and Canadian market where the Australian wine producer was able to place more product into the Canadian market. I would, without seeing the numbers, I would probably argue that it probably didn't cover or supersede, wherever the market may have been before. But there's an opportunity. I mean, from any negative with regards to duty, it imposes action, and from that action, people look for opportunity. So there's always an opportunity in those things. So I suppose that's my 5 minutes worth on the tariff side of things.
No, that's great, Leo. I mean, once you break the box, you're kind of forced to think outside of the box, right? And it would be interesting to see a year from now, once some of these changes have put in place, and the Australian businesses have taken advantage.
Yeah, correct. From where the economics aspect, Sia, for example, once upon a time, the Canadian wine drinker may not have been exposed to Australian wine. So even if this tariff environment resettles, you may find a new habit being formed where, for example, in this case, the Australian wines are now well known or better known than they once were prior to the tariff. So therefore, it creates an organic market and distribution channel because of the tariff.
Yeah, we're all hoping, right? So it remains to be seen, but that's certainly, that opportunity is there, and it's and we should talk about this about a year from now and see where we're at with it. But certainly that's interesting. Jim, coming to you here, we've all seen the back and forth between the two countries, Canada, United States, and now that we have settled a little bit of those tariffs, how's that impacting Canada?
Well, I would like to say first that when we talk about trade, we are not talking only of goods, but we're talking about services as well. And if that is true, that the tariffs are going to guide the relationship of imports and exports of goods, the services will come along with those relationships, and then you are talking about the double whammy. It is not only one element, but there are two elements there. And in the case of Canada, like any other country that has, first of all, trade needs stability. If I am an exporter of anything, I will look to have a permanent buyer of my product, and I need to be able to guarantee certain volumes, a certain frequency of the products that I am sending. When that relationship is severe, I have to find a different buyer to buy my products, and then I will try to establish that relationship with him. So when you say, well, what could change afterwards? Well, once these new channels are being redirected to a different market, probably will be difficult to bring them back on how they used to be before, because they will be hurting someone else. Canada has acted to take strong steps in finding these new relationships and has signed very strong agreements with a number of Asian countries and a number of the European Union in particular, and England. And in the European Union, they have also talked about incorporating Canada as member of the European Union. Something that is not very common to see the European Union bringing countries from different regions to be part of the union. And what is the consequences of being part of this country? There is consequences of currency, consequences of regulations, consequences of making decisions as a group instead of being an individual. So all these changes that are happening that, in my opinion, are of major significance. It's going to be hard to bring them back of how they were before,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
believe, ask me, what is the consequence between the US and Canada? I believe that it's very sad to see a relationship that have been for many, many years to be broken in this way just because of one person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that ultimately the difference between being a sort of victim of circumstances versus seizing opportunities for creating perhaps new relationships, right? There's definitely opportunities to create some new relationships, and we've had a chance to talk about those relationships between Canada and Australia. So as we're wrapping up our this particular episode, I want to give you guys an opportunity, a chance to say any parting words with our audience, our listeners.
Okay, well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having invited me to the very, very first podcast for the FY Group and the International. So from that perspective, I would say to anyone who's contemplating, setting up business or conducting business in Australia, that it is a safe place to do business. And through this group, hopefully we've got some skills here where we can actually point you in the right direction and assist organisations who do a little bit of business here in Australia.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Appreciate that. Jim, how about you?
Well, again, as Leo mentioned, I'm very happy to have been part of this first podcast and see that there is an opportunity to be able to help our clients to expand their horizons with this relationship that exists between our two countries. I believe that these two countries are stable countries that can provide a market opportunity for people from outside of this region to deal with a place where people is fair. Both countries were open for business, ready to help. We have the professional elements in our organization to be able to provide that support. So happy to answer questions from all the listeners of this show.
Yeah, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Jim Fernandez, Leo Delgado, thank you both for being here with us. Thank you for sharing your pearls of wisdom. If you're listening, if you are a business, an individual looking to expand to Canada, you're in Australia or you're in Canada, looking to expand in Australia, or you just have questions, I want to encourage you to reach out to either of these two individuals, or you can reach out to FY International. We'll put you in touch with both of them. Thank you for giving us your precious time. We look forward to having you with us on our episode number 2. Once again, thanks for joining us at FY Global Talks. We see you and talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.